Karishma Vaswani in Singapore. The headlines. Planes carrying hundreds of American passengers from the quarantined cruise ship Diamond Princess have taken off from Tokyo and are heading back to the United States. In China, streets in the Hubei province are deserted as 60 million residents are ordered to stay indoors. We'll be discussing if quarantine on this scale works.
Hello, I'm Nuala McGovern in London. Also on the programme, hundreds of flood alerts remain in place across the UK as the second major storm in a week batters Britain. And the hug of a killer to the son of his victim. We witness Indonesia's radical approach to preventing terrorism.
Live from our studios in Singapore and London. This is BBC World News. It's Newsday.
Good morning. It's 9 a.m. in Singapore, 1 a.m. in London and 10 a.m. in Tokyo, from where two planes evacuating American citizens and their families from the Diamond Princess cruise ship have taken off. The ship has been in quarantine because of an outbreak of the coronavirus on board. Japanese authorities say 355 people on the ship have now tested positive for the virus. My colleague Rupert Wingfield-Hayes reports.
Only those American guests who are disembarking the Diamond Princess tonight.
For the Americans, at least, this is the moment that for many could not come soon enough. On the dockside, the buses lining up ready to take them to Tokyo Airport and an evacuation flight home. 355 passengers aboard the Diamond Princess have now been diagnosed with the new coronavirus. In the last 2 days, there's been a steady stream of ambulances removing them from the giant ship. 70 cases today alone. When I got through to American Gay Quarter in her cabin, she was busy packing, more than eager to get off the ship.
I do not feel safe on this ship. I don't know how more of us who've been sitting here for 12 days are getting contaminated. But something is going wrong. This is a failed quarantine. But I think we had figured that out in the first few days when the numbers kept rising.
It is very clear from the statement that the US government has made that it is worried the quarantine on board the ship is not working and that its citizens are in danger, and that's why it has decided to take them off. Several other governments have now followed, including Canada, Hong Kong and Taiwan.
At Tokyo's Haneda Airport tonight, the US charter planes touched down. The American evacuees now face a grueling flight and another quarantine. But those we spoke to say they prefer that to spending another day on a ship where they do not feel safe. Rupert Wingfield-Hayes, BBC News in Yokohama.
What an extraordinary set of circumstances, really highlighting the challenge in controlling this outbreak. Now, within the past hour, officials in China say the number of new cases and deaths has risen, with over 2,000 new cases and 105 deaths. The total number of cases is now over 70,000, with 1,700 deaths. This comes as China's government has further tightened controls on movement in the province. 60 million people have been told to stay at home unless there's an emergency, and the use of private cars has been banned indefinitely. Later in Newsday, we'll be discussing the ethics of putting people into quarantine for prolonged periods of time, just to add that the majority of those deaths that we talked about a little earlier are in China.
Right, let's move and take a look at some of the day's other news. Beginning here, Storm Dennis has been battering the UK and other parts of Northern Europe. It's the second severe weather event in the space of a week. In the UK, South Wales was particularly badly hit. Heavy rainfall has turned roads into some rivers, like you see here. And police say they've also been dealing with multiple landslides like this one. John Kay tells us more.
From the River Clyde in Glasgow to Devon and Cornwall, Dennis has been an unwelcome weekend guest in almost every part of the UK. Vast areas overwhelmed by huge quantities of rainfall, record numbers of flood warnings, rescue teams and the authorities stretched to the limit.
We are doing more and more than ever before in terms of investing in flood defences, protecting more homes than we've ever been able to before, but we are seeing a higher frequency of these sorts of freak weather events.
After dropping a bit this afternoon, the water levels here in Tenbury Wells are now starting to rise again. It is going to be another anxious night. John Kay, BBC News, Worcestershire.
Thanks to John. Also making news today, the first step of a partial truce between the Afghan Taliban and the United States. It could start as soon as this week. Talks on the deal, which would begin with a 7-day reduction in violence, have been taking place at the Munich Security Conference in Germany. Syrian state media have reported that government forces backed by Russian air power have seized most of the rebel-held province of Aleppo. With the help of Moscow, President Bashar al-Assad has re-established his control over most of the country after nearly 9 years of civil war. The UK's biggest airport, Heathrow, has apologised for disruption to flights. That's after a computer breakdown. It meant that flight information boards and check-in terminals were unable to function. Staff used whiteboards, as you can see there, with handwritten details. One passenger said it had created utter chaos. The airport says the issue is now resolved. Hundreds of people in Lebanon have been rushing to buy plane tickets after several major airlines said they would only accept payment in US dollars. The change will be imposed from Monday and includes the state-owned carrier Middle East Airlines. Lebanon is in the middle of a financial crisis. More than 1,000 former Justice Department officials in the United States are calling for Attorney General William Barr to resign. They're accusing him of interfering in the sentencing of President Trump's friend and ally Roger Stone, who was convicted last year of lying to Congress. Mr. Trump criticised the recommendation as horrible and very unfair. Officials in Australia say a benefit concert for people affected by the recent bushfires has raised millions of dollars. Thousands of people attended the event. It was in Sydney with Olivia Newton-John, 5 Seconds of Summer and Alice Cooper among those performing. The US singer Adam Lambert joined Queen to reprise the band's legendary 22-minute 1985 Live Aid set. And now let's turn to the annual carnival in the Italian city of Venice. The festivities got off to a flying start on Sunday as a young Venetian, you see her here, performed the Flight of the Angel. She glided her way into St. Mark's Square as people paraded the city streets in costume. The carnival season lasts about 2 weeks.
Now let's get more on our main story. US citizens have been evacuated from the Diamond Princess cruise ship near Tokyo in Japan, which was quarantined due to an outbreak of coronavirus on board. But not all American passengers took the opportunity to return home. Matthew Smith is one of them. He answered some of our questions.
There were several reasons. The primary reasons was we were concerned about the conditions of the evacuation, with the U.S. government believing apparently that the quarantine we've been in so far was ineffective. They decided nonetheless to put all the Americans being evacuated together onto 10 coaches and onto 2 airplanes back to the United States in clearly non-quarantine conditions. So in fact, if people have acquired the virus, whether before or after the quarantine, they're now put in a very close position of communicating it to others. People seem to be of the impression that we're allowed to just mix freely about the ship. There are some people in interior cabins who are allowed to go outside on the ship for an hour at a time and are permitted to speak, are able to speak with each other if they maintain the 2 meters distance and they're in masks, but they're obviously able to communicate. We do not have that access because we have our own balcony to go out on in a large cabin. So that hasn't ever been offered to us. And so we haven't been in contact with anyone else on board throughout this. And while we do see and hear people on the other balconies, we almost always go back inside immediately when there are other people nearby because we want to maintain the isolation. I do not have any complaints against the Japanese health officials for their handling of it. I think they did what they believe they needed to do, and I think it's naive for people